Welcome everybody to the Climate and Coordination RCast. This week we have a wonderful guest, a member of the R-Chain board, Steve Ross Talbot, and Daryl is going to introduce him a little bit more in a little bit. But I wanted to start off the call today talking about a very interesting cooperative, very successful cooperative story out of Denmark, which I actually first discovered from a tweet from the World Economic Forum last week. And then I found the original article was actually first written in 2017. And I guess the tweet was basically an update. But I will put this story in the chat right now. And I just thought it would be really interesting because it really ties together climate and also successful cooperative structures. So anyway, this is talking about the wind companies that are actually cooperatives in Denmark, and the fact that Denmark is now getting 40% or above 40% of their energy from wind, and actually these companies are 50% owned by the citizens there. They are actually kind of using it like an investment tool. It says here that 8,500 Danish citizens raised 23 million euros for the project, and now apparently they're getting 7% back every year. And this is as of 2017, so it's probably now growing. And basically, they really involved a lot of different Danish citizens, thousands of them, in the process of choosing where to put these turbines and, drawing up the contracts and everything. So it was really co-funded, co-managed, and co-owned, it says here, by the people of Denmark. And this project is obviously wildly popular because people are making money off of it. But also, it says here, there's a member of the board that says people are quite satisfied with this because it is much better than having it in a bank, your money in a bank. And at the same time, you are doing something positive for the environment. So I just wanted to share this interesting story because it's such a great example of how a cooperative, when it's done the correct way, can make people money, it can be popular, it can help solve a problem. And it just seems like this is really where the future is headed. And obviously also it says that they're trying to, Denmark is trying to get to 100% renewable energy by 2050. But I mean, if they're already 40% there, or above 40, I think they'll definitely get there early, and also 2050 is way too late. So anyway, I just wanted to share this, and if anybody has any comments about this, that would be wonderful.
They're trying to do something similar in parts of Scotland. Tried doing it in the UK, but in England, but the government in Westminster is less supportive of it. The Labour manifesto, alas they didn't get in, included provision for platform cooperatives specifically. I'm not surprised it's Denmark. Mm-hmm. And when you go to Copenhagen, you notice just how many bikes there are. Everyone is on a bike. So they're really quite conscious of carbon emissions. So well done them. And yeah, definitely something to follow.
I've seen the news about Scotland. They're doing a lot of amazing work with renewables. I don't know exactly if they're doing it through cooperative structures or not, but I think that is such an interesting and progressive way to really make money for people through a green transition, because that is one of the major, sadly and incorrectly, it's one of the major controversies, I guess you could say, or fears to going to 100% renewable energy, as people think the economy is going to suffer or they're going to live in a cave or whatever. But this really shows that people can make money off of saving the planet, which is, I think, just incredibly cool. And I think we should do that here, but might be a little bit difficult.
Yeah. Because that's one thing I found interesting about that article that you sent is the whole kind of collective ownership aspect of the article. In Denmark, there is this culture of norms where there are more co-ops, and so I think that it kind of probably was an easier sell for the Denmark populace to absorb that idea. And norms take a while to shift and change, but I think that's, you know, one thing that I think, you know, the torch that we can carry at our chain is that, you know, co-ops can work. So, and specifically platform cooperativism. And one thing that I found really interesting about the article was kind of like the idea of this kind of triangle. It's like there's collective ownership as a concept, and then you could apply decentralized computing and the whole idea of energy grids as some type of a peer-to-peer system. Those three things, I think, are an interesting thing to kind of examine as an idea. It's like we're on the cusp of an evolution in capitalism and governance, where decision making in a communally owned enterprise can be expanded and enhanced by a decentralized computation system. It's like the process of decision making that can be spread out through a platform that's built around an architecture focused around collective intelligence, an architecture that helps people collectively make better decisions. And it's like the notion of the need for better collective decision making is particularly timely today when a collective decision is being made by the US Senate right now that might not be a good one. Not to drag politics into it, but.
No, you're totally right. And
politics is life.
Right. No, it is life. And I think that another aspect of the reason that the Denmark thing works is that they kind of trust each other a little more than we trust each other here. And, you know, there's so much anti-government sentiment here. But even if I think this is just a hypothesis from me, but I think if the private sector were to launch a co-op and do this kind of a thing, it would probably gain a lot more traction than if it was a government entity. Of course, you have to have some level of partnership and all that stuff, but it's really unfortunate that Americans like just distrust the government so much. And I guess, well, sometimes the government really doesn't do the right thing, but I just think that in Denmark, they probably have a lot higher level of trust for each other and for their government. And so it's easier for people to buy into something and say, okay, I'm going to invest in this, and I think it's actually going to be good for me. You know, that requires a high level of trust. So that, I think, would be a little bit of a barrier.
I've posted in 3 links. So given that Scotland was mentioned, I've put in 3 links. One of them isn't to do with Scotland. So the first one is Alan Watson, who I heard speak when I was at Findhorn for my sort of week of being a Findhorn initiate, where you give service to the community there. Alan came to speak to us. What's interesting about Alan is he's from Findhorn, so he has that kind of cooperative gene in his blood naturally. And he founded Trees for Life in 1986. That's how long ago it was founded. So he's the first person to see that the changing of the flora and fauna by planting the wrong trees in the wrong place causes kind of what are called green deserts. So across Scotland, they've lost 90% of Scottish pine because they planted other stuff to harvest quickly. And he's going through and replanting essentially rewilding Scotland. And he's an amazing inspirational speaker, definitely worth any YouTube videos. Great speaker. The other one that I've posted is about Findhorn, the community itself. What's interesting about them from what we've been talking about is they have their own wind turbine for the community, and they have their own biomass generator for the community. So the community, anyone that lives in Findhorn, the eco village, they're drawing electricity communally rather than just going to the grid. And these are the guys that have the lowest CO2 emissions on the planet, combined with the highest sustainability ratings. So well worth a sort of little forage in there. And because I'm connected to the Findhorn community anyway, I've been looking, that's why I'm involved in governance on our chain. Well, one of the reasons. And then the other link that I've posted is Roger Hallam, who's definitely worth talking to about climate change. He's one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion. And what he talks about is how you build a mass, highly decentralized organization. So there's 3 good links there that you might want to follow. The
Ah.
Roger Hallam ones are inspiring too.
Definitely going to check those out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So you seem to be on a roll, so I'm going to pass this over to Daryl, and he's going to formally introduce you, Steve, for those who don't know who you are. And then I know that you guys have some things set up to talk about, so I'm going to pass it over to Daryl.
Okay. Yes, so today on our show, we have our guest, Stephen Ross Talbot, otherwise affectionately known by the community of cells in my body as the notorious SRT. So Steve has been in computer science since the Stone Age, 1974. He is an expert in standards, having chaired all of the WS standards at W3C for 3 years and co-chaired the W3C choreography working group for 5. He has been an invited expert on several other standards, from BPEL to ISDA's FPML and Unify. He is a tech principal at ThoughtWorks, started many companies, is an author of the SOA Service-Oriented Architecture Manifesto. And if this isn't enough, he's also a professor at Kingston University in London, focusing on distributed computing and the Internet of Things. And Steve happens to also be the current Grand Poobah of the Board of Directors at Archain. And I hope I had that all right, Steve.
Apart from ThoughtWorks, I was at ThoughtWorks, and maybe there'd be an opportunity to talk about companies and company construction, because ThoughtWorks is an interesting example, but I won't talk about that now. Yeah, thank you very much for that intro. Really, all I would say for anyone listening is all I am is a guy that cares, and I have some skills, to use that phrase from Taken. I have some very specialized skills, and my God, I will use them because I care. So that drives most of my decision making these days. And I have been out on the streets with the kids when they march here in Brighton. I tend to sort of keep a really low profile because I think it's for them to say their piece and not for me to say anything. So I just walk alongside and don't say a word. But do so very proudly. You know, that's our future there. So one of the things I wanted to sort of share with you guys is I got approached by a company, because, you know, I'm always on the lookout for interesting companies, called Electric Miles. I think it's electricmiles.co.uk. It's looking for funding currently, and it's I'm helping them. And what they do is quite interesting. They're focusing on the low energy market. So everything that has happened since battery technology improved, you know, so supporting solar, or indeed charging your car. And it's charging your car that Electric Miles specializes in. So what they do is they monitor the forecast of green energy production, and then map some kind of plan for charging your vehicle against the miles it figures out you need the next day, so that you draw energy at the most sustainable times within the calendar, and still end up getting to your destination and back. It's just that there's more of a guarantee that the energy that you've just charged your car with is low in CO2. And I got involved with them, and I thought, you know what, if you go on their website and you watch, they've got a little movie, a bit like Archain, and it's not dissimilar. The aspirations are the same, and that's what really made me sit up and take note. Originally, I thought, oh, it's another company wanting to kind of use my skills for nothing, when sometimes I actually really do need to get paid. But I really warmed to them, and I've been helping them with the architectural design for this, and it's going to use machine learning techniques and AI techniques to manage the charge points. It's really interesting when it's a fleet of vehicles, because the savings can be immense. And then we got talking about raising funds, and the CEO is really interested in blockchain for being able to do energy exchange, at low voltage energy exchange in particular. And to do that, really, he kind of would benefit from using a scalable blockchain. Don't know if anyone knows scalable blockchain that might be about to go live on Wednesday. I hear rumors. So, it's a natural fit for our chain. What was really interesting was that when he has been going around the VCs, and this is VCs all around the globe, from VCs in the Valley to VCs here in Europe and London, and VCs over in China and India. And there's a common theme, and that is, tell us more about your blockchain idea for this market for low energy. And that has fired up the imagination of the VC community. And, so I'm fairly confident these guys will get funding. But what they need next really is a proof of concept, which I'm going to map out sort of what we could show. And I'm actually going to share that with the R-Chain community. I've already cleared that with the CEO because a POC ultimately will be thrown out and they'll redevelop. But I wanted to put something where we can tokenize the low voltage energy and then do the exchange, the settlement side of it, to provide that sort of low energy, low voltage market for peer-to-peer exchange. And so what that would mean practically is that, if you've got a Tesla, if you're lucky enough to have one, or any other electric vehicle, and you may have some batteries also in the house that have been taking in energy from the sun or from wind or water, and you've got way too much of it. You don't need all the energy there, so you've got maybe a couple of days worth in the batteries, given what your likely consumption is. And your next door neighbour that has 6 kids and it's a cold winter's day is running low. You can actually do a deal with them and swap your energy and exchange your energy so that there's peer-to-peer exchange. So that's the idea, and that's kind of what's really fired up the VCs. For what I think is, this is the first step in the democratization of energy. And if you think about what that may mean, on a meta scale, right? And you look at, or you might have heard the term peak oil production. This has all come about because of our demand in the world that we live in for energy. So if you can democratize the energy, then you would never have had the thing that happened in the United States, which was loads of money went into aviation and they pretty much strangled the railways out of existence. And we know now that from an ecological perspective, was a disaster. But that was driven by the petrochemical industry realizing they would make more money by encouraging planes than they would by encouraging trains. If you democratize the energy, they do not have that stranglehold anymore, and we get to choose. So for me, it's potentially the beginning of a really interesting journey.
Wow, that's amazing. I just kept thinking while you're talking about that, just how that democratization of money generation can work. Like to me, again, it gets back to the whole kind of concept of shared ownership in a co-op, and that article that Nora sent. How could you perceive that part to work with this?
I think it in part it's to do with the maturity of the individuals who coalesce. So in a society like in Britain, probably in the States, if you looked back 50 to 60 years ago, when I was growing up, when I was almost Nora's age, a long time ago for me, it was normal for people, for families to have their meals together. Right now, it's kind of like on your lap. And equally, there was much more cohesion. So you'd play out in the streets with your neighbours' kids, and it was a safe environment. And you would not be seduced by digital media because it wasn't there. And with the introduction of digital media and the introduction of if you like, the throwaway economy, people have been running to buy the next thing, whatever it is. I mean, look at the queues when a new iPod used to get announced. It was ridiculous. Now people are rethinking that, but not everyone is. I mean, if everyone was, you wouldn't have Donald Trump and you wouldn't have Boris Johnson. You would have very different forms of government, more like, say, in Finland, where 3 women run the country in a coalition. I bet they get things done, and I bet they get great things done. So I think this, I think what you'll see is, and this is where our chain comes in as well, as an enabler for people to exchange value and ideas in the little pockets that they gravitate to. And Findhorn's just one example. There are many eco-villages. There is a global network of eco-villages. So I think the eco-villages will act as a catalyst to the formation of other eco-villages. And that's what I'm seeing on the ground. I'm going to be moving towards Cornwall in the next 2 years, to St. Just as opposed to Findhorn, in order to start up and help build such a community. Kind of sharing.
Yeah, so you're going to actually be creating another eco-village? Is that your idea?
It's already starting to take form. It's kind of like watching cells grow. So it's not, when these eco-villages start to become, they kind of develop in a natural evolutionary way. So it's not like somebody has a plan, I'll go and start one there. You have to find some sort of center of gravity. This is exactly how Extinction Rebellion started. There was a center of gravity in Somerset, in England. Roger Hallam and about 5 others came together, sitting in a pub, thinking, what can we do? And then started to talk about it. And so people start to talk about it, and then they start to share more and barter and exchange, not with money, but directly with goods. So somebody swaps a cabbage for a few potatoes. And that's starting to happen down in St. Just. And they're looking northwards to Findhorn for inspiration as to how they can put some structure around this, so that it's not just based on goodwill, that there is some structure, some semblance of common principles, some semblance of common rules that people wish to abide by. And those really come from within, because it's because you have those shared values and those shared aspirations that you seek a place to live with people that think the same. You know, contrast that with today, where old people, so even older than me, that are like my dad, who's like 88, he ends up in a home, like, you know, some of you guys, I'm sure it's the same, for your parents or grandparents, and they're in a home with people that they have nothing in common with. And we spend an awful lot of our life making decisions that lead us to work in situations or live in situations where we have nothing in common with the people around us, and that sense of isolation. And so what do we do in those situations? Well, a lot of people go to the mall and buy more things. So by wanting more out of life, by looking at happiness and not just through the lens of how much money you have in the bank, I think that is what will start to change how we as a society evolve. And we're either right about this, right, and we get this just in time, and the world steps back from the brink, or we're wrong about this and the world doesn't step back from the brink. And then what happens is the James Lovelock scenario, that there is famine, there is war, people fighting over water and resources. But I still think this idea of coming together, having shared values and wanting to share amongst that community will win out even through that. That may be, if you like, I mean, a terrible thing to think about, but you're essentially a culling, right? That's kind of would be self-culling. It would be, you know, like shooting yourself in the foot, but as humanity, but that's what it would do. And society will go back to some sort of perhaps more technological, but a dark age of some description. And that's what James Lovelock says in his books. I'm hoping James is wrong. I'm hoping he's wrong. And I kind of think that this model of how we can get along and how we can democratize energy, which will have a profound effect upon the creation of such eco-villages. I'm more of the optimist than perhaps James Lovelock is, but then he is 100. Perhaps he has the right to be a bit more pessimistic.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'd say, just to finish one thought. The reason my wife and I want to go and do follow us. It's nice to have my kids around 25 and 21. They go off on their little travels for a while, but they always come back. And they really like living here because I run this house with my wife on the same basis as Findhorn runs. So we have an attunement to every meal. We used to say prayers in the Catholic days. We have an attunement, which is actually much more deeply spiritual. And we celebrate coming together. And we have people come for dinner, guests, and they, some of them are very, oh, what are you guys doing? You're a bit touchy-feely, holding hands around the table and saying a few words. Actually, people have come to know us in the place we live in for doing just that. And it's that attention to grounding yourself in the present and on this planet that I think for me enables me to get through every day. And to do it, if you like, I always like the way Greg signs off his email. He's always done it ever since I've known him. And I think that love and light in your heart is an essential commodity. It's just a lot of people just aren't in touch with it. And actually doing these small things, like doing an attunement, and doing that regularly with people around you that perhaps aren't as enlightened, they will become so. Just that one tiny thing. And it's you do this at Findhorn at the beginning of the day, right? You discuss what you're going to do, right? The work you're going to do. I was in the kitchen, and you then do an attunement to do it with love. And Findhorn calls it love in action, which sounds very hippie-ish, but really what it is being totally mindful of the job you're doing and doing it to the very best of your ability. And the attunement gives you that focus. It's bizarre, but they've picked this up in management circles in MIT.
Well,
Full stop.
Yeah, no, I think that's, you brought up some really good points. I do think the world is kind of in a disconnected place, especially even people with their families, like especially in America. I think in Europe it's less like this, but in America it's really common for the kids to move away and just like not come back, ever. And if they do, they come back, very briefly or whatever. But I feel like families in Europe in general, or like I have to say the UK and Europe. So weird.
Yes.
They seem to have a stronger connection.
Yeah, we've got 6 hours. I've got 5 hours and 54 minutes before I cease to be a citizen of the European Union.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that you were going off the cliff today. Let us know how you feel after that happens.
11 o'clock.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
I feel, it's a retrograde step, but sometimes a friend of mine, social worker, said to me, sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. There's a lot of truth in that, but it doesn't alter the fact that when it's in the worst bit, you feel shit.
Yeah, so true.
And that feeling of shit can last for the entire term of an American president.
And perhaps longer, we'll see. Sorry, Daryl, you wanted to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh, just kind of riffing off the idea of things going shit before they get better. There's this kind of viewpoint that kind of helps me through that depressing thought from Daniel Schmachtenberger, where he kind of likens it to a caterpillar, where before the metamorphosis, the caterpillar starts eating voraciously. It just starts consuming everything in sight for no reason. He doesn't even know why. And it's almost like that's what we're doing. we're like, you know, we've reached peak oil. Fracking has extended it, but you know, we've reached peak oil. We've kind of like, we're just like voraciously consuming everything, and we don't know why. But maybe it's part of the whole big picture. Maybe we have to do that to become the butterfly. And another thing he mentions about that process,
there's another
is
peak we've reached, which is.
Oh, sorry, sounds like we're probably on a big delay.
Oh yeah, I think it was. So I was just going to say there's another peak called peak centralization. And this is something Miko Matsumori talks about, who's, you know, Evercoin, founder of Evercoin. And peak centralization is that moment where society in some way has a reaction to centralization. And the first reaction that we could really observe as having an effect was open source. And the second major technology reaction was Bitcoin. Because they're pushing back on the notion of centralization and authority. I can't say the word now, tongue-tied, but I think you know where I'm going. So, you know, and I think that the notion of cooperating in smaller communities and having a community, fostering it, nurturing it, valuing it, that's also a reaction to, I think, peak centralization, where all you are, unless you're one of the centralizing bodies like a Facebook or a bank or whatever, unless you're one of those at that top level, there's a feeling that you don't matter. And so this is a natural reaction, I think, for people to say, well, I do matter, and I'm going to find other people that think we matter too, and I'm going to live near those people. So I think it's all the same thing, you know. It's I think I like that analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly, because when the caterpillar starts to go in its chrysalis, I don't quite know what happened inside that chrysalis, but it's like there's shed loads of stuff going on in there, and I can't believe it's all pleasant. So, but out comes a butterfly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of, you and I, Daryl, we're definitely optimists.
I try to be. It's like, the other thing that he mentions is that when the caterpillar goes through that metamorphosis stage, it basically just turns into goop. It like completely dissolves into something else and then completely reforms. It's just an amazing aspect of nature.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I would have loved to have done, and had I been involved in our chain from an earlier time, I would have definitely asked to do it. And that is when we all met up at the Berlin, when I first met you, Nora, in Berlin, I would have loved to have done a massive attunement. I totally would have loved to have done that.
So what can you describe that more? Like what exactly
so an
are you
attunement.
referring to?
So if you hold your hands in front of you like you're praying, right? So just hold them out in front of you like you're praying, and then you turn your thumbs to your right, and then you slip the top hand to the left and the bottom hand to the right. So you've got a hand up and a hand down. Now, if we were sitting around a table or standing up, right, we would clasp hands with our hands in this way, right? So it's a perfectly balanced circle in terms of how our hands are interacting, right? Because you've got left hand up, right hand down. So right hand face up, as it were, palm up, and left hand, it's the top of your hand that's up, right? And the other person slides their hand in, so you're holding hands. And then what usually happens in Findhorn is somebody will lead, so whoever's cooked the food, I mean, 250 of them, that's what I was cooking for. Somebody would say, right, thank you everyone for being here. I'd just like you to shut your eyes or soften your gaze. And I just want you to, feel where you are standing and root yourself to the ground. And, dial down your head a bit and dial up your heart a bit, dial up your emotions and feelings. And, just take a moment, take a few deep breaths. Deep breaths are taken. And then there would be, I'd like to thank everybody for being here, whoever's leading would say, and we've all worked really hard in the kitchen to prepare this meal for everybody. And what we've got today has come from the garden. So we'll talk about where the food came from. And, we offer this to all of you communally and with love. And that's it.
Okay, so basically it's like one big community blessing, basically.
Yes. But it's
Well,
done.
nice.
It's done at dinner,
yeah.
Right? Like in the community, in what's called the community centre at Findhorn. But equally, it's done in the kitchen. So when the 4 cooks got together, we did it with 4 of us, and then it was about the focus was about what we were going to cook today and doing it. It truly is about if you took the spiritual side of it away, for those that are less comfortable with that, it's being mindful. It's being in the moment. It's experiencing the moment, every moment, for the whole day in what you're doing, connecting with it. And by doing that, what you're doing, and that's why it's called love in action, you are enjoying, you're loving your work. Programming, you could be in the IT department, whatever it is, they do this right across the Findhorn community. At the beginning of the day, to kick off work, at the beginning of all the meals, at the end of the day, to finish work, and it's a practice that's just done, repeated over and over again. But I was skeptical, but I have to say it was pretty amazing, transformationally for me, in that now I do it without batting an eyelid, and in fact I miss it when I'm away. It's become a daily ritual. Those daily rituals are one of the reasons why Findhorn as a community has existed for so long. There are other communities that tried, but because there was no common ritual to bring people together, they fracture over time. So it's not just a sort of, oh, let's do a blessing communally. It really has purpose.
Well, it sounds lovely, and I definitely think that we should get together and do one. And next time we're all together, which God knows when that's going to be, but hopefully soon.
I'm trying to figure out how we can do it on Zoom right now.
Oh, God.
I know. Look, I tell you, you and I need to collaborate on that, because I have dreamed of that.
Oh, really?
I have dreamed of that. Yeah. Truly.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, exactly. Wow.
It was a bit random, but it is all connected. I mean, it's the interconnections. It's kind of like when you watch Avatar, right? You can't help but be drawn to the love affair with Mother Nature.
Yeah.
The integral part that we play and the connections.
He's making another one, isn't he?
I believe so. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah. No, it is all connected. You're completely right. Everything is so connected. And I posted some things to Discord. I think it was last week. I need to remember exactly when it was, but I was just finding all these stories of these, feedback loops from the climate crisis. For example, all this ash in Australia is starting to wash into the waterways, and it's killing all the fish because they're shaded and they have no oxygen, and they have no sunlight and all this stuff. And so that's one thing. Or the fact that when there's a big climate catastrophe, tourism takes, tens of billions of dollars in hits. So it really does. There's so many connected things that we don't, think about all the time. And, there's an evaporation problem everywhere because it's getting so hot. and now you have companies and governments putting plastic, like balls, plastic circles into the water in order to shade it from, you know, evaporation, which is a terrible idea because you're just adding millions of pieces of plastic into, you know, the environment. And all these things are super connected. So I don't think it's off topic to talk about an attunement, because clearly the world is not very attuned right now.
No, it isn't. But it's the attuning of, you have to grow this, you know, the seed has to grow. So yeah, and you have to tend to the seed. They don't just turn into, you know, wonderful plants and the rest of it. There's a bit of attention required. So in order to grow the communities that can help make that difference, you know, because the Australian government isn't listening to Australian people. Donald Trump wasn't elected by the majority of Americans. We know that, you know, the whole thing with Brexit here in the UK was dominated by alt facts and downright lies. The only way to address that, I think, is the reaction to peak centralization, and to therefore build communities, and then step by step, you start to dismantle the structure of current carbon-based, petrochemical-based society. But it has to be step by step, and you have to have, one thing that I learned in W3C is patience. You have to have patience. Time is short, right? But time is short in the sense that it's not like it's tomorrow. It's a decade, 2 decades if we're lucky. But there's a lot that can be done on the ground if you're passionate enough to do it, and you can find a community from which you can, on whose shoulders you can stand and be heard collectively. You know, I mean, I was watching a bit of jazz, and I think there was a certain Nora Germain playing whilst I was up in the north of England a few days ago. And I was watching you play, and it was a brilliant demonstration of just total connectedness to the moment.
Oh wow! Thank you. I'm so flattered.
Right? It was great. It just flowed, right? As if it was always going to happen. You know, like when sculptors say it was always in the rock, right? It was a great little performance.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
But it's that, you know, you have that sort of passion for these things. Now, when you're doing that, it's kind of like all over in 5 minutes, right? This is all over in 20 years. So there is time, but you just, every day, it's taking another step. So, you know, a step that's, we're trying to be plastic free at home, which is not always easy. I mean, we just bought some, my wife just bought some stuff from the supermarket, and it was Cornish douche potatoes, and or Dutchy potatoes. And Dutchy is Prince Charles's farm. They're supposed to be sustainable and organic. And Lisa found another bag of potatoes, not by Prince Charles's farm, but by some other farm, that was just done, it was wrapped up in sort of like string netting, right? So you have Dutchy potatoes, Prince Charles, with plastic bloody wrapping that isn't even recyclable, set against these potatoes wrapped in this sort of string bag. So she's just gone online and put it on Facebook, on the Dutchy Farms Facebook, right? It's things like that. And you just have to keep doing it, Dave, even though sometimes it feels like you make no progress. You know, you just keep doing it. I was involved in the liberation struggle in South Africa, and I never thought I would see freedom in South Africa. I never thought Mandela would be released. I never thought, every day I did something. Every day I put myself out there, but I did it not thinking I would see it, but believing it would happen. And you have to have that. It has to be so ingrained that every day it's one step at a time.
Wow. Well, yeah, that is extremely inspirational. And I think it could be potentially a perfect spot to stop today, unless somebody else has any burning comment. But if not, then I would really like to thank you, Steve, for joining us today. And I would like to invite you back anytime. I think that you could, if you want to be, you could be one of the core members of this RCast, because you bring so much experience and I don't know, just a really great perspective to this. So
I just care. I just care.
Yes, that should be on your business card. It should say your name and I just care, and that's it.
Good idea.
So anyway, yeah, it was great. It was so great to have you on. And I guess I need to mention, if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, please do that. And if you'd like to become a member of our chain, you can do that at www.ourchain.coop. And then finally, if you are interested in being a member, being a guest on our climate and coordination call, you can do that by emailing climate@ourchain.coop and just let us know what you'd like to discuss. So I guess that's pretty much it. We didn't actually hear anything from Greg today, but that's okay. Usually he chimes in.
I was just listening.
I'm sure he'll.
I was listening.
Oh, okay. No, that's great. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Daryl, for all the research that you do to make this so great.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Thank
we'll
you,
see
everyone.
everybody next week.
Thank you, everyone, for having me.
Yes,
and it's just nice to be with other people that care too.
Yeah, likewise, Steve. Thanks for caring, and just I always learn so much when you go on your spews. So I love it.
Same.
Thank you.
Same.
Thank you. You're very kind. Take care.
Okay. Well, we'll talk next week then.